Hey guys, Michael J. Crawford, aka Salty here. And I'm really excited because finally, after over a month of various family issues and vacation and all sorts of stuff, finally me and Mr. Know-It-All are going to be able to do our regularly scheduled live stream once again. Except that, well, Mr. Know-It-All has no power in his house right now due to the recent snowstorms in his area. So, while we're waiting to see if he gets power back, I figured that I would make this video. And what inspired me to watch this video is actually I was surfing some of my subscriptions and I was checking out Dave Cullen's latest video, Can This Save Star Trek? And the gist of the video, for the most part, is a rant about the current state of Star Trek and what he thinks needs to be done moving forward. And let me start out by saying, in no way, shape, or form am I trying to criticize, attack, belittle, or anything like that Dave Cullen. He seems like a really nice guy. The fact that he's Irish and I'm of Irish descent, well, kind of makes it harder for me to attack him anyway. So I just don't want you to think that I think that Dave Cullen is a dick. In fact, who on YouTube would I even say that about? So Dave's video is basically a rundown of many of the problems that we have with current era Star Trek. The problem that I run into, though, is that, well, the more I think about it, the more I think, are we, the fans, just kind of being whiny about this in some ways? Don't get me wrong, I've complained as much as the next guy about the shoddy state, particularly of Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. Now, Dave Cullen is one of those people that seems to think Star Trek Picard Season 3 was okay. I, agree to disagree on that. But I quite like Lower Decks and Strange New Worlds, and I think that Star Trek is heading in the right direction right now. And the more interesting thing to me is the fact that almost every criticism that Mr. Cullen levies against current era Trek, people like myself levied against Star Trek back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I thought I would look at some of the complaints that Dave makes in his video and then directly compare that to how I felt a few decades ago.
Must also understand that damage has been done to the brand in the eyes of millions of fans around the world. Specifically, the unwanted transformation the franchise went through, beginning with the tonal and visual reboot of the 2009 J.J. Abrams movie and subsequent Kelvin timeline movies, which bear really only a passing resemblance to past Star Trek.
So with this first complaint that he gives in the video, all you have to do is change the date to 1987 when Star Trek The Next Generation premiered, and just like the Star Trek 2009 reboot, it only bared a passing resemblance to Star Trek. Everything about this show was completely different. The uniforms, the interiors, the exteriors, everything that we saw looked nothing like any kind of Star Trek we had ever seen before.
Then in 2017, with the dark, depressing Star Trek Discovery.
So then in 1993, we got the dark and depressing Star Trek Deep Space Nine.
With unlikable, unrelatable characters and some jarring canonical breaks. Turns out the Spock we knew and loved had a super secret human sister in his childhood, and she was human, and we were never told about her. And her name is Michael Burnham. Yes, her name is Michael. And she was a diverse messianic Mary Sue who always seemed to be the key to saving the Federation in any given situation. And she made Spock the man that we knew in the original series.
Yes, because Michael Burnham was the first annoying Mary Sue to be on Star Trek.
Star Trek Picard was a series that gave us clunky, disjointed plots, detestable and bland characters, and F-bombs, as well as gratuitous, disturbing violence, with only a decent third season giving us a bittersweet taste of what the series could have and should have been from the beginning.
Now, I'm the first to admit that the Berman era of Star Trek never gave us F-bombs or extreme examples of violence. However, that being said, I do want to say that the king of clunky storytelling is and forever will be Star Trek Voyager.
Star Trek continued to reinvent itself for a modern audience by creating a Star Trek comedy animated series called Lower Decks, something that would have just been unthinkable in the 90s, because apparently all of the parodies and spoofs of Star Trek throughout the decades weren't enough. Official Star Trek had to produce a self-aware send-up to the franchise, a Star Trek comedy filled with inside jokes and tongue-in-cheek winks and nods to canon. I don't think something like this would ever have gotten the green light under Rick Berman, and I doubt Gene Roddenberry would have approved of the franchise deliberately descending into outright farce.
Look, I understand. Lower Decks, some people love it, some people hate it. I get that. However, I have to take a big issue with what Mr. Cullen says here about Gene Roddenberry basically would never have approved of Star Trek stooping down to this level. Because throughout this video, Cullen is basically focusing in on the Berman era of Trek and talking about how awesome it was. If you're going to levy a complaint against Lower Decks because Gene Roddenberry himself would not have approved, you may be right. I don't know if Gene Roddenberry would have liked it or not. That being said, Gene Roddenberry was pitched an idea for Star Trek that he despised. He absolutely hated it. His response was more or less, "over my dead body." So what did they do? They waited until he died before they began production of a Star Trek that was a wartime drama that was set on a space station. Yes, that's right. Gene Roddenberry hated the idea of Deep Space Nine. Not only that, there are 2 movies in the Star Trek canon that Gene Roddenberry has seen and actually despised before when they were released in theaters. And that is Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, and Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country. In other words, Gene Roddenberry hated the very best of Star Trek. So quite frankly, I don't care if Gene Roddenberry himself would have liked a particular Star Trek concept, because Gene Roddenberry's idea of good Star Trek was Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1 and Star Trek The Motion Picture and The Cage. In other words, Gene wanted Star Trek to suck. And Star Trek was a huge success and cultural impact despite the efforts of Gene Roddenberry, not because of them. And sorry if I sound a little upset, but I am so sick and tired of people worshiping the great bird of the galaxy when the great bird of the galaxy dropped a giant turd on our collective windshields. Take care.
Star Trek is the greatest franchise there has ever been.